Okay, welcome to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. My name is Nick. That's Joseph. Oh, I got to tilt my head that way. That's Joseph. There. That's now. I got it. Now you got me going the wrong way. Anyway, welcome. We have a quite the interesting show for you lined up tonight. But before we get to that, one of the things I wanted to do we just spent my wife and I 2 days driving from Killaloe, Ontario, up here to Sioux Lookout. It is about 1,200 miles. Thank you, Chrissy. We're glad to see you in the chat room. And I'm sure you'll be joined shortly before with more. But anyway, it took us 1,200 miles, about 2 days to do the trip. And the reason why I mention this is because we have two dogs. You may have seen them in previous shows in the background. They're around here somewhere. But they're farm dogs, and they're used to being out on the yard. Most of the vast majority of their lives, they haven't worn collars. They just go out and they run around. We call them in when we want them in the house, or supper time or something like that, and they generally stay pretty close to home. But this was different because we've never had them in the truck before. I've taken them once in the Fit, which was fun. Driving around, I spent 2 hours with them, and for the most part, they were pretty well behaved. And we had some. Oh, that'll be interesting. Craig says, "What a great time! What great timing! I just finished hosting a federal conservative board meeting." Well, that's cool, Greg. Craig, glad to have you with us. Anyway, so we put them in the truck. We had leashes for them and collars because you never know, right? This is a brand new experience for them. And over 2 days, they behaved like champs. I couldn't have asked for better behavior. So we got them used to the routine in and out, staying still while we put the leash on and all that. We have those extendable leashes. And as we're driving, making the last leg of the trip up to Sioux Lookout, about 45 minutes out of town, this is the real point of the whole story. I posted this on my Facebook page, but if you missed it, we happened to come across somebody in a little SUV who had stopped in the middle of the road. So I had to stop relatively quickly. There was no, just, what's going on here? They were feeding a bear cub out the window of the SUV.
Uh-oh.
Look.
Not a good idea.
It's not just not a good idea. This is a very bad idea for several reasons. For one thing, you have no idea. It was a spring bear. This bear was only born this year. You could tell by the size. Black bears can get 800 pounds. The world record, I think, is 1,000. So you don't want, and they're very, very strong. A 200-pound male black bear, or a black bear period, is many times stronger than a 200-pound man. Okay, so if they want to get into your vehicle, your window is nothing but a Venetian blind to them. It's a minor inconvenience they can dispose of. They just hook the claws in, and boom, now they're in the car. So these people are feeding this little bear. I don't know what it was. They threw something out and went shuffling over. I'm thinking, where's mother, right? Because a cub like that is too young to wean. So you don't know where mother is. Now, it might have been an orphan, maybe, but at the same time, you have no idea. You can't tell. So that's number one. Number two, the habits, because they're cute when they're small. That bear maybe weighed 40, 50 pounds. But when it hits 2, 3, 400 pounds, it doesn't know that it's big and strong and dangerous. And if it's developed the habit of going to humans for food, whether snack or they look at a small child like a nice light snack for themselves, now they're a threat not only to human beings but to themselves, because if a bear attacks somebody, they shoot it. So unless you're in hunting season, so there's all kinds of really good reasons never, under any circumstances, to feed wildlife, especially a predator that's as dumb as a rock. Bears are not smart. This isn't Yogi and Boo Boo in Yellowstone National Park stealing picnic baskets. Okay, and I forget the ranger's name.
But, so Nick, I'm just going to interrupt you because I don't want you to go too far off the rails and be too insulting towards bears.
Well,
And
let's just put it this way. I would never want to come between Mama Bear, no matter how smart she is,
right.
and her offspring.
Well, and this is the other thing. Okay, for all of our listeners and viewers, in downtown Toronto, okay, just make it important. It is important for you to remember all of these rules about feeding the bears, just in case you encounter one in the hallway of your 39th floor condominium.
Look, I don't know who was in the other car, but I do know it wasn't a local. It
No,
wasn't someone.
not a good idea. Clearly, and
Yeah.
by the way, for our listeners, Nick is having a few problems with his microphone, so you can hear him, but he's sounding a little bit muffled tonight, and that's because we couldn't get his external microphone working, so he's using the microphone, I think, on his computer or his webcam. So just be patient, and I guess what will end up happening here is you're going to have to pay attention to the show tonight.
Absolutely.
No running a hockey game in the background trying to pay attention to
Well,
both
there's
of
no
those
hockey game
things.
on tonight.
There's no hockey game on tonight.
It's tomorrow night.
Okay, well, see there, that just goes to show you, Nick. I was too obsessed with your bear story.
Yeah. Well, to make a long story short, this is what gets people killed, or at least injured. And think about there was I think Marin, who will probably show up later on in the chat room, sent me a note on Facebook, and she said they were going through Kicking Horse Pass or someplace in BC, and there was a bull moose standing with a full rack, which means it's in the fall. And guess what happens in the fall? You have the moose rut. Uh, they had sent their 4-year-old child over to try and pet the nose of the moose so they could get a picture. Do you know
now,
what a moose would do to
I've
get it?
I've driven the highway between Banff and Jasper
I think
a
that's the
few
town she
times,
mentioned was Banff.
and it's not moose is a little unusual, but bears on that highway on the side of the road are not unusual. And so lots of times you'll see tourists pulling over on the side of the road and taking pictures, but I've never come across anybody feeding the bears except
Well,
for at Wonderland in Niagara Falls.
I think that's where they get the idea,
They
and
were
that and
feeding
they
the
watch.
bears marshmallows, the polar bears. And of
And
course, the polar bears were just lying back. If you could picture this, you can picture the polar bears just lying back, waiting to see if anyone was going to get one of those marshmallows to just fly right into their
it
mouths,
doesn't even
right?
have to move.
It's,
I,
I thought to myself, okay, this doesn't appear to me to be, an imitation of their natural habitat.
No.
No.
As a matter of fact, my wife and I went through a some kind of safari park. I think it was in Nova Scotia years ago, and there was a raccoon sitting in a cage eating dog food, and he was just sitting on his butt, and he was nothing but rolls of fat, and he's just horking those things back just as fast as he could go. But overall, though, my point is, wildlife are called wild for a reason. They are either predator or prey. Both are very dangerous. Like if you come across an animal that tends to get eaten, sometimes they will turn and defend themselves. There's a very famous clip of a female deer in a suburb somewhere that literally stomps the living crap. I think she killed it out of a border collie because it got too close to her fawn,
Hmm.
and she turned and stomped the thing flat.
Hmm.
Everybody's screaming and hollering, and the deer's not paying anybody any attention because she's focused on that. Imagine if that had been a child.
Yeah, we weren't planning on discussing this.
No,
This is
but
one
this
of
is
those situations, of course, where we end up talking about things that we're not really
well. Part of the
planning
reason
on
I
it. But
mention it now is because people are going on vacation now,
yeah,
and
but
while some animals are not all are relatively docile this time of year, moose being one of them, still never go near a moose. Stay the heck away from them. They don't call them swamp donkeys for nothing. Again, not that bright. And if they take a disliking to you, you can't run high fast enough. You cannot climb high enough that they will not get you. They will outrun a quarter horse.
so
So don't think for a second you're going to get away.
No, but those are rare animals to run into, unless you're in the right environment. But actually, here's a really interesting and timely public service announcement, and that is, if you have Canada geese in your neighborhood, don't chase them, because they'll run away until they don't, and when they stop running, they start chasing.
Actually, there's a funny story about that I had to deal with because geese are a flock animal, they're a flying herd, and they have a dominance chain, right? Lead duck goose versus tail end Charlie. And there was one landing when I was a building inspector. I was out in Canada or someplace like that where we were in the middle of going through a renovation, and a set of Canadian geese had decided to set up shop in a circle driveway in the bushes, in the centerpiece of the circle driveway. And one of them, the big male, came after me as I'm walking up to the door. Well, I've been around herd animals for years, so I just turned around and I punched him right in the chest, and I
Right?
sent him back. And he shook his head. He came back at me again, so I took the helmet I had and I whacked him in the head. And after that, he backpedaled and he wouldn't come near me. And as I'm walking into this building, the lady behind me said, "That goose attacked you." And I said, "I know. That's what they do." He wanted to make sure I knew he was above me in the ranking, and I told him in no uncertain terms that was not true, and he's backing up, not me. Now
But
you can get
Nick,
away with that with a goose. You
Nick,
never try
the
that with a
question,
moose.
I guess the question that I have, Nick, is what is it about your aura that makes a goose think that you're lower on the feeding chain than he is?
He just didn't know me very well
Clearly, he didn't know you very
because I
well.
was not putting up
So,
with that.
so I have in the background here, you can see on my chin, I have a blind that's open. So the partially open, and the sun is setting behind me, and it's looking like I've got this weird. I've dyed part of my beard white or whatever. I don't know.
I think you're just trying out for a part from Harry Potter in the next Harry Potter series.
Anyway, what are you going to do, right, Nick?
That the best
So
thing.
how's your week been, Nick? So you're back situated in Sioux Lookout, Ontario,
Yep.
and which, by the way, I think is NDP country.
Yes, it is, but the gentleman up here who ran for the BC party, a fellow by the name of Monk, who he first, I think it's Eric Monk, won over 32% of the vote.
Wow.
Yes, for this riding, that's remarkable.
So
He came in
couple of
second.
couple of things that just come to mind about last week's election, and which was on Thursday, so it was the day after our show from
Mhm.
last week. So we have a new conservative majority government, but what's really interesting is that the voter turnout was something like 42 or 43%, which was a new record low. And of course, the last couple of days, the newspapers have been all filled with people prognosticating the demise of our political system, our democracy, if we don't have some kind of reform and move towards some form of proportional representation. And of course, I see you shaking your head, but this is always the same thing. Okay, there is, like, I understand the dissatisfaction, the unhappiness with having a majority government elected with 37 or 38 or 40%. What 40% of a 40% turnout means that you've elected a majority government with what's 4 times 4, 16% of the eligible voters. And But what I guess what really bothers me is that the automatic assumption that people are not going out and voting because they're not happy with the voting system. And if only we fixed the voting system, or more precisely, if only we changed the voting system to something else, then that's going to solve the problem. And isn't this, I'm sorry to sound partisan, but isn't this always the liberal sort of left wing approach to things?
Mhm.
Is that we don't like the way things are, so we're going to come up with some kind of a theory, a theoretical solution to the problem, and we don't care about the experience of people. We don't care about the fact that this is our traditional way of doing things. And I'm not defending it simply on the basis of being our traditional way of voting, but what I am saying is that the so-called solution to it is really nothing more than a theory that may work, it may not work, but it's always the same thing. There's a problem. The problem is clearly a crisis. Democracy is in trouble in Canada. And the solution, of course, is the latest scheme by whoever happens to be speaking the loudest or have them monopolizing the media at that particular point in time, from the left. So it could be proportional representation. It could be mixed, whatever it was, MP or MPP. I can't remember what it was. We had a
Political
referendum,
mixed
of course, a
martial
few
arts is
years
what it
ago, but
is.
mixed proportional something or other. Whatever. I don't know. So I'm thinking to myself, just there. I don't know what the reason is why people didn't get out and vote. Maybe they just didn't think that the issues. Maybe they didn't think the issues were really worth getting out and voting over. They didn't care.
Well,
Or B, maybe they just didn't like the selection of the parties and their platforms, and they just basically set a plague on on everybody's house.
I
The
think you're
point
on
is,
something there.
I guess the point I'm making here, Nick, is that we don't know. And the funny thing is, you get all of these knee jerk reactions, the knee jerk solutions, and nobody has even bothered to actually speak to the people who didn't vote to ask them, why didn't you vote? Now they're going to tell you, well, probably, I'm just assuming here, that they're going to come back and say, well, we didn't vote because what's the point? They're all the same. And that's a fair criticism. But my very strong suspicion is that if you polled the 60% or so of people who didn't vote, in the last election, I would be surprised if most of them, or even a strong minority of them, came back and said, I didn't vote because I think the voting system is wrong, and if only we had proportional representation, then I might go out and vote.
Yeah.
I think that that's just an
It's
invention.
always the losers who want the proportional representation style of government. And I'm gonna disagree with our friend Craig when he says people are just plain lazy. I don't think that's it. Because how much effort does it take? I went and voted. It took me like 10 minutes. Walked in the polling station, proved my identity, walked over to the ballot, marked the ballot. That was it. And I was in and out in 10 minutes. I don't think it's laziness. I
Well,
think it's
maybe, but
closer to,
maybe it is, Nick. In fairness, maybe
well,
there are
okay,
a
there's
lot of
going to be
people who don't
some,
vote
but
because they're
I
just too
think
lazy
here's
to
what
vote.
happens, Joseph.
Yeah.
If you have people who are inertially challenged, let's put it that way, when it comes to expending energy on voting, you have to give them something to vote for to propel them off the couch to go and vote. And what are
Fair
the
enough.
major differences between any of the parties, right? The Tories want to spend more money. The Liberals want to spend more money. The NDP want to spend more money. Now it's in varying degrees and certain, color hues are a little bit different. But, when people look at this, you're right, a pox in all your houses. I have no more money to give. I don't want any more spending. Or if they do want spending, it's in areas these guys are not talking about. So there's no connection to the voter because the voter looks at whether it's municipal or federal and say, you have no idea what my life's like. You've never once said, okay, here's how we're going to bring the price of bread down, or here's what we're going to do to incentivize industry to lower the price of food. Okay, or what about gas? Well, fuel. They do have a role to play in regulating new refineries and pipelines and all that stuff. Plus, they have taxed everything to death, so they could do things like reduce. Like if Doug Ford had put out that gas tax relief before the election, I think he'd won by even a larger margin than he did, with probably a larger number of people voting for him, because
Maybe.
that's instant relief. That's what people want. They're tired of this. Look at the mess at Pearson Airport. You get this nonsense babble out of the transport. I know I'm blending jurisdictions here, but that short little ugly guy, I can't think of his name, but I can't remember his face because he's always hiding behind a mask. But he says, well, it's a priority for our government to fix. Yeah, that'll help people standing for 6 hours in a line in a queue in Pearson and in some of the other airports. What about just dropping the travel mandate, saying, you know what, this isn't working? Or even what benefit it does bring is not worth the pain it's causing. It's like cutting an arm off with a dull cold spoon rather than a hot sharp axe. Which one is going to be painful? Well, they both are, but one's over a lot faster. So none of this is connecting with people because they're speaking to themselves. They're talking about what they want people to think, the way they want people to wrap their heads about it. Now I don't know whether John was able to get the clip, but I asked him to download, and if it's ready, John, if you got it, great. But it's a clip from the old Twilight Zone, and the character in the clip has been hauled before some kind of state tribunal to justify his existence, whether he's an obsolete human or not. And it's not so much the content, the conversation, but it's the attitude portrayed by the state over the individual. And let me see if he's answering me here. He's got it. Okay, how much time we got left? Yeah, yes. Okay, so John, I'm going to get you to roll that, and we're going to watch. It's about 4 minutes long, but it's worth it. Pay attention to the attitude, not so much the words, and listen because it sounds really, really familiar. Go ahead and roll it, John.
This is Mr. Romney Wordsworth in his last 48 hours on Earth.
Wordsworth, Romney, field investigation finding obsolescence. Do you know why you're here, Mr. Wordsworth?
Yes, sir.
I'd ask you to speak up a little, if you will.
Yes, sir, I know why I'm here.
You've been under investigation, Mr. Wordsworth, for the mandatory period of 1 year and 11 months. You're found to be obsolete. The purpose of this hearing is to make a finding in the matter and make a sentence accordingly. Do you understand that?
Yes, I understand that.
Your occupation, Mr. Wordsworth?
A librarian, sir.
A what?
A librarian, sir.
Has this man had counsel?
Yes, sir, he has.
Are you sure he knows his rights?
He's been given orientation, sir.
Mr. Wordsworth, I'm told that you've had Stand back in the light, Mr. Wordsworth. I'm told you've had counsel and been given orientation, Mr. Wordsworth, but I'm still not sure in my own mind that you understand the purpose of this hearing. The field investigators in your sector have classified you as obsolete. This finding carries with it serious implications. Do you understand that, Mr. Wordsworth? Now I ask you again, your occupation?
I am a librarian, sir. That is my occupation. That is my profession. If you people choose to call that obsolete...
Request clarification of the term?
Yes, the term, Mr. Wordsworth, you people. You make reference to the state?
I make reference to the state.
And you persist in declaring your occupation as being that of a librarian. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
A librarian. Having to do with books.
Yes, sir. Books.
Since there are no more books, Mr. Wordsworth, there are no more libraries. And of course it follows that there is very little call for the services of a librarian. You are obsolete, Mr. Wordsworth.
A lie. No man is obsolete.
You have no function, Mr. Wordsworth. You're an anachronism, like a ghost from another time.
I am nothing more than a reminder to you that you cannot destroy truth by burning pages.
You're a bug, Mr. Wordsworth, a crawling insect. An ugly, misformed little creature who has no purpose here, no meaning.
I am a human being.
You're a librarian, Mr. Wordsworth.
While we might not be talking about librarians, doesn't that sound familiar in the government's attitude toward careers and
Well-
toward people they don't like?
Well,
That's
here,
an extreme, what's the word I'm trying? Oversimplification, and it's over the top, but it's meant to be. And that was broadcast in 1961, by the way. They already were thinking along that line.
well, here in the city of Ottawa, where we're in the process now of getting close to $500 million on our new world-class, state-of-the-art central library, even though very few people are actually using the central library. So he definitely wouldn't be obsolete here. Although somebody, and actually, Lowell Green has his show also on Blast the Radio, and I would, recommend people, if they have the chance, to download a couple of episodes of Lowell's show. I think that you'll find it's quite worth it. So anyway, the point I would make is that Lowell has been from day one an outspoken adversary of or opponent of the Central Library Project, the new Central Library Project here in Ottawa. And I believe if it's not him, others have pointed out that, you could, for the cost of this new library, anybody who wants to get a book could just order the book from the city of Ottawa and have it sent to them for free, that the taxpayers pay for it, and that they, that is to say the client, would own that book forever. So you don't actually have to have a building with librarians in it. So it's really interesting. But actually, what I found even more interesting in that clip was that the librarian was played by a very young Richard Basehart.
That's right.
So
Now,
I don't know if it was a little hard to recognize him because of his age, but he went on to play.
But that's exactly who it was. Now, the point about it wasn't so much about libraries. It was the fact that the state was deciding who is valuable and who isn't. Now, the implication is the serious consequence is you no longer have a purpose, therefore we are going to literally eliminate you. We're going to kill you. And the guy stood up and said, I have value just because I'm a human being. That's the only qualification I need to have value. And that has been lost, I think, in a lot of our culture, where people are looked as the cheap and disposable whenever they are inconvenient. And that used to be just the hallmark of the pro-life crowd, but now it's generally believed across the board by the state. It's not just the old and the infirm or the very young or unborn who are inconvenient. Now it's anybody who doesn't believe in the green agenda, won't take the vax, is standing up to Justin Trudeau or the state. Let's call it the state, okay, as applied in this thing. Those are the ones that people are saying are obsolete. People like you and me who have a different mindset about the way we look at the world are considered by the progressives and by the elites to be obsolete, unnecessary to their vision of the future. And that was the point of what I was trying to make with that video.
Sure. But there's nothing new in that. That's always been the sort of left-wing liberal view, is that experience is not that important. What's important is our rationale, our ability to rationalize things, our ability to reason things. This is the whole Enlightenment project. And, I know people are going to be up in arms when they hear me say this, but I don't think that the Enlightenment project has been such a success. Not to the extent that, you've substituted reason, and I'm not knocking reason, don't get me wrong, but I think that reason has to be informed by experience as well. And, someone far wiser than me once made the observation that the most perfect theory that doesn't work out in practice didn't work out in theory either. You just didn't figure out what the flaw was in the theory.
Right.
But if it doesn't work in practice, it doesn't work in theory either, no matter how perfect the theory appears to be. And so often I hear people say, well, it works in theory, but I guess it's just not working out in practice, as if that was somehow that was an intelligent approach to it. Somebody just pointed out that was Burgess Meredith in that clip. Now I'm going to have to go back and look at the clip again, because I was pretty sure it was Richard Basehart, but maybe it was Burgess Meredith. They're now you see. Similar. Now I'm starting to doubt myself. And what have I said before many times? And I know we're up against the break here, but a little self-doubt isn't a bad thing.
Amen to that. All right, we will take a break. We'll be back in about, I don't know, a minute and a half, 2 minutes. So we'll see you on the other side. Please stay there. Joseph and I will be back with far more entertaining talk than your mind can absorb in one evening. We'll be right back.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm Nick. He's Joe. I just couldn't find the right tab. There we are.
Yeah, Nick. You know, if you when you're wearing your glasses, if you look just the right way, we get to see everything in your computer screen.
That was a good thing. There's only you and I on my computer screen. Oh, brother. Well, that was a.
By the way, okay, listen, very important. Let's clear this up right from the word go. It was apparently Burgess Meredith. So we stand corrected, or at least I stand corrected. And I just want to make it clear that misleading our audience was not intentional on my part. But hey, I'm a big enough man. I can admit when I'm wrong. Mainly because if I don't admit it, I'm going to get, people are going to come after me and say.
Well, Craig already did, but that's beside the point.
Well, yeah, he corrected me. Good for Craig. I appreciate it. Thank you. Got to stay on top of these things, right?
We are not beyond being corrected. Just be right when you do it.
Yeah.
Then it's not really a correction, is it? Anyway, the next topic down the list I wanted to get to was this idea, a Democratic governor, I think it's in Louisiana, has banned trans people from participating in female sports because female athletics were being destroyed because the girls can't compete with biological males. Apparently, there's 11 other states who have done or are doing exactly the same thing
In the United States.
in the states.
Yeah.
And I think it ought to be a worldwide ban. Because, first of all, never mind the sexual politics behind transgenderism and all that. Like, there's a short documentary out there somewhere called What's a Woman? And the guy goes around, I should know his name, but I can't think of it at the moment. My wife was trying to track it down earlier today because she wanted to see it. He was asking people, what is a woman? And no one could answer him. No one wanted to answer him because as soon as they do, then they have to admit that trans people do not fit the category. So anyway, the idea that you've got these, that started out with this swimmer out of a Northeastern university, I think, in the swim program, was blowing the girls away. But in his competing as a male, he was like 122nd in the world. He was, there were a lot of guys faster than he was, but he was a lot faster than all the girls, which is not something people should take pride in. I mean, look, if you're going to brag about arm wrestling girls, but you can't beat a single guy, then you've got nothing to brag about. So I just wanted to bring that up so that people understand there is kickback, there is repercussions coming for this woke nonsense, such as we're going to allow these mental females instead of the biological ones. And you got to watch the Ricky Gervais video. I don't recommend it. We played that last week, didn't we?
Right. There's more, but it's not for our show.
No, but the point I'm making is people are now beginning to do what we should have done from the very beginning. First of all, use common sense, logic, and reason about who can compete in what kind of sport. Sports is supposed to be beyond politics. It's supposed to be about merit, and it's supposed to be about the best man, in this case, person, win. But you can't mix genders because there are physiological differences. Like, who is it? Williams. I can't think of her first name. Was it Vanessa Williams, the tennis star? She and her sister. Serena was one, and I cannot remember her the other one. But she said, I would never want to go up against a man. I'm the best female tennis player in the world, but I'm only, if you rank me against the guys, I'm 235th or something like that. She recognizes the fact that no matter how good she is, she'll never be good enough to compete in the upper tier of the world that she would want to enter if she was going to compete against men. This whole you remember the Billie Jean King versus...
I was just going to mention it.
Yeah. Well, that was more...
What was the guy's name? I don't remember the guy's name.
I forget. That's what I'm trying to...
Billie Jean King was
Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs.
Bobby Riggs?
I believe that was it.
Could be. That sounds familiar.
It's Venus Williams, by the way. Thank you, John. I think
for those who don't know, Billie Jean King, and I think it was Bobby Riggs, but we'll double check that. But it was it was
Bobby Riggs. Yep.
It was the tennis match of the century. It was the
Bobby Riggs asked for it.
Well, it was a male tennis star versus a female tennis star.
Yeah, but
and I think she won, didn't she? That match.
She did. She kicked his butt. And the thing is that she was like half his age. He was well past his best.
Probably a chain smoker.
What's that?
Probably a chain smoker.
Oh, in those days, yeah, probably. And he just shot his mouth off, and she stuffed a tennis ball down his throat. Because at some point, no matter how good you were, you can't. It's a declining skill set as you get older. And he was in his 50s, I think.
So, but here's the question. First of all, Nick, I think I don't see this as a question of rights, and I don't think you even have to get into the whole question about transgenderism or anything like that, on whether or not people should have the right to simply change their gender to the degree that that's scientifically possible or not possible. That's what the argument is. But the question here, there are two levels to it. The first level, of course, is the competition itself, and to allow this to become a question of rights, I think, is to really, really miss the point. But I want to raise another question here, and that is, I disagree with transgendered athletes competing, men who have transitioned to women, competing in women's sports. I don't think that should be allowed. But here's the real question, I think, in my mind at this stage, Nick, and that is that something that the government, any government, should really be imposing its will on? Is that really something that the government should be involved in? I mean, really, when you think about it, athletic groups, sports organizations, schools, universities, etc., they compete with one another not under government rules, but under league rules and associations, and agreements between the different schools, etc. Is it not possible for a university athletic association to come together and to say, no, we're not going to allow this to happen. It's not fair. Does the government really have to step in and say to that athletic association, no, you're not allowed to do that? I really think that that's an important question to ask, because isn't this really a case of the people who are paid to administer and to ensure the sport, the league, the competition in question, who are paid to do this, who are paid to ensure that there's a basic fairness in the competition, basically saying to themselves and to the world, we're afraid to make a decision here, so we're going to decide not to decide, and we'll leave it up to government to make the decision for us. Now, I know there are a lot of conservatives out there that are going to say, yeah, I think the government should be making that decision. But speaking as a conservative, I'm not so sure. For me, the jury's still out. I just don't know that this is the role of government.
All right,
I think this is really a question of society accepting something that probably shouldn't be acceptable.
Okay, I'll see that point, that maybe you're right. Maybe this isn't the government's job. However, they've decided to take it on, and they are banning the practice. Yeah, and you're also right that it should be up to the institution. But ask yourself this question: why isn't economics playing a role in this? Do people go and watch an NFL or an NHL game, want to see the very best of the sport? Like, look, one of Canada's most famous female hockey players, Kaylee Wickenheiser, on a gold medal team, she's had an amazing career. Wouldn't make the Arizona Coyotes. Okay, she's just not good enough. She couldn't take the pounding, the physical pounding. Watch the NHL playoffs right now. The last game between Washington and New York, Washington, Tampa and New York. Holy mackerel! These guys are hitting each other like, sledgehammers. And no disrespect to Miss Wickenheiser, there's no way she would last a game or two in that particular theater of operations. It's just people don't go to the NFL to watch girls catch footballs thrown by guys, because the guy who's going to hit the girl instinctively might pull up because it's a girl. You don't want to hurt the girl. And that takes away from the quality of the product on the field. That's why you don't see women playing in sports at that level and making that kind of money, because people don't want to see it. I mean, driving it, let's go over to NASCAR. NASCAR, okay, I don't know if there's any female NASCAR drivers, and if there is, great. I no doubt they've earned it. At the same time, it's the amount of pounding even those guys take in those cars. They're pulling several G's going around a corner for 500 miles in some
Yeah,
cases.
look, I don't I see no reason. Look, you want to have open competition, have open competition. The fact is that you're not going to have any women uh, uh, making the NFL. Okay, but I was just checking the Joanne Pollock was the general manager of the Ottawa Rough Riders for 3 years. The Ottawa's professional football team, or
Right.
one of the previous iterations of Ottawa's professional football team, uh, uh, and so and if I'm not mistaken, I think she was the first female general manager
I
in
think you're
professional
right.
football anywhere in the world.
There's a difference, though. And that difference is upstairs, office staff,
Okay, fair
general
enough.
managers,
But
coaches. They're not on the field getting their brains beaten
but
in.
why do I need a law about this?
No, my point is in professional sports, you don't need a law. It's a rule of economics that wins.
Okay, so
How
this
come
is
it's different with universities? Don't they have, like, look at Notre Dame, okay? They have a football program unrivaled in the country, maybe even the world. Okay, they produce hundreds of thousands over their history of candidates for the NFL, or before that, the AFL
yeah.
or AFC, whatever it was. Same thing with a lot of American universities. They're all about look at the Michigan State Wolverines or the Michigan State Spartans out of the universities in Michigan. Okay, sports is much more important to them than academics are. Some schools are about sports that have an academic uh, side. Others have strong in academics with a bit of a sporting side.
So what's your point?
My point is, if you allow the market to deal with this, what I'm doing is I'm basically ceding your point. The government has no role because this would solve itself, okay, through economics. Because people are not going to pay $500 or $1,000 to go watch the Toronto Maple Leafs play the Tampa Bay Lightning if there's four girls on the team because they know they won't be good enough and they won't make the playoffs. They won't do it. They won't pay for that. So that eliminates the girls. And it's not about being against females. Good Lord, I love females. And there's lots of different sports I enjoy watching females compete against each other. I love women's hockey. It's a great sport. It's a different sport than the NHL is because there's no hitting, not like you see in
Yeah.
the NHL. And it's just a different slice of it's a different slice of a slightly different pie. So if you allow the market to deal with this instead of the state, and what I'm doing is I'm thinking aloud, coming around to your point of
Yeah,
view.
I get it.
And
I don't even think though, when it comes right down to it, I don't even think it's an economic argument. Sure, I mean you can make that argument, but in the final analysis, I think it simply comes down to a question of competition first and foremost, and that is, um, uh, do women, biologically born women, okay, um, are they able to compete on an equal basis in the NFL, for instance? And if they're not, should we be making rules in the name of inclusion in order to allow them to participate?
of course not.
And I'm not saying that we should, but it just seems to me that that's one of the questions out there. And why should this even be a government issue? Look, here in the Canadian Football League, we have rules that basically say that a minimum number of your players on the team and a minimum number of starters in a game have to be Canadians. Um, I don't know. Personally, I don't see how it enhances the game, but those are the rules, and the league makes its own rules. And I'm not really sure that there's a role here for the government to interfere. And if in fact the government has to step in and say to a university, women's swim competition association or whatever
program, yeah.
the program is, if the government has to step in and say, we're going to pass a law that says no males transitioning to women can compete in this sport because it's not fair. As true as that may be, I think it is true. What does that really say about the state of society where we're dependent on the state to basically come up with that rule and enforce it? To a certain extent, I think probably what troubles me the most about this whole thing is that first of all, you're kind of simply treating the symptom by passing that law.
Yeah,
okay,
true.
and it's a symptom of what? It's a symptom of lack of principle, of lack of common sense, and or probably more appropriately, lack of willingness to stand up, put your foot down, and take a stand in favor of in support of common sense.
It's funny because there are some sports. Craig just made the comment thing. If you want to see the genders compete, then start another competition. There are already some leagues out there, maybe not professional, but you've got mixed baseball leagues, right? Softball leagues, and so on, where girls and guys play together. I don't have
Sure.
any problem with that. Okay, I'm not saying that women shouldn't compete in sports, but when you are talking about the kind of sports where somebody has gone through university through a swim program or a football scholarship or an NHL, a hockey scholarship, and they're training to become an athlete at an elite level in the world, the standard, man, I'm just thinking out loud. The standard should be, here's what the qualifications are. And if you can meet those qualifications, excuse me, you can participate in our program. If you can't, you can't. And what that does, what you want to make sure of, though, and I think this alludes to an earlier point you made, is we don't lower the standard to make it easier for certain groups.
But
like they've done this with firefighters.
But you understand, Nick, so I'm sorry to interrupt, Nick, but you understand the dilemma, right? The dilemma is that this women's swim team aren't lowering any standards to allow this guy transitioning to female to be on the team. What they have to do is they have to put a cap on standards, if you will, in order to prevent him from being on the team because he's too good, because he's a male body that's transitioned to female, and the rest of the team can't compete with him. So again, it's to me, it's just a common sense thing, and I don't have to come up with a system or a set of rules or guidelines for anything like this. Like I just look at this and go, okay, let's just use our common sense here, guys. Just use our common sense. If you want, and by the way, there's one more angle to this, but before I get into this, touch on that. Okay, let me just say this. Okay, if you want to have an operation and call yourself a woman and all of that stuff, okay, hey, it's not my cup of tea, but I'm not particularly interested in standing in the way of that. Okay. So, set that aside for a minute. But I do think that you got to have common sense. But here's the real issue, another issue. And gosh, I mean, these are controversial topics. Okay. But what do you do in a situation where in Canada in particular, a lot of these laws in terms of protecting the rights of transitioning people from one gender to another, that the law is so ambiguous that we use terms like not gender identity, but gender expression. And so there are a number of laws now of statutes that basically say that you don't even have to have an operation. You don't have to have transitioned. That you, in fact, as long as you have a gender expression, in other words, I feel like a female. Therefore, okay, I'm not going to have hormone therapy. I'm not going to have an operation. I'm not going to, I'm not going to put my money and certain appendages on my body where my mouth is. Okay, I just feel this way. This is the way I express my gender, and so the law is in Canada now that in cases like this, that you can't stop a person, you can't stop a guy from going and into and using a female women's change room or women's bathrooms, etc. And that I think is really problematic, because how do you determine what is and is not a genuine gender expression, and should, even if it really is genuine, should that be sufficient for people to be able to do that? There's a case, a recent case, well, I guess it's a few years ago now, and I really should check what the disposition of this was, because, and we've talked about this before, there were a few cases of men um, deciding that they wanted to get into a women's shelter, a shelter for abused women. And so what they did was, their basically the way of getting in was to say that I'm transitioning, or I'm expressing, this is my gender expression. And by law, they were not, the administrators weren't allowed to bar them from entering. So you had the absurd position where a woman who had escaped an abusive relationship was being forced to room with a male who was in every single respect biologically continued to be a male. And they were expected to share a room together, share facilities together, change in and out of clothes together, because that was the right of the man, who basically was just saying, this is my gender expression. And so if you want to go down that road, maybe it's worthwhile having a conversation of saying, maybe that's where the standards should be. Let's leave it to the athletic associations to exercise their common sense. Okay. And let's talk about having a law that says, if you want to transition, then you better transition, which means you got to have the operation.
Okay, well, let me make a comment about that just before we run out of time, because
sure.
I'm watching the clock here. Getting back to sports, sports is supposed to be, and I know it's not always the case, but fair in its application of the rules, fair in its opportunity for success. And, when people talk about, a situation within sports, well, that wasn't fair. Somebody takes it, gets maybe a break in on the curling rink, or a call gets missed in a hockey game or football game. That's not fair. And people care about that. That's one of the reasons they watch sports, because it's one of the few areas in life where fairness still matters. And that's why I think there's this great outcry about guys competing as women in women's sports. And that's what's propelling a lot of this stuff, because people intrinsically know that it's not fair for a woman to engage in a sport that requires the kind of physical attributes that males excel at, because of their physiology, when they just know it's not fair. So that's what's propelling a lot of this. I know it's certainly on top of my mind. You've got, people, young ladies who spend their whole lives, just like a young kid, a young boy starting at age like 4 or 5, and ends up in the NHL. He spent his whole young life getting ready for the moment of that draft, and or getting onto a team, or breaking the lineup, or whatever it is. And people understand that there's risks that come with that. He's competing against the boys his age and his size, and it's, different, very within a certain margin of error, his skill level. But when you can put a woman and a man together, all of a sudden the guy's got this big advantage that the girl doesn't have, and they see that as intrinsically unfair, and that's what propels a lot of this. So
Yeah, well, I'm all for fairness.
well, if fairness from the point of view is as fair as we can make it. Life is not fair, but in the world of sports, it's entertainment and it's also escapism. It's a lot of things. And this is where we try to be as fair as humanly possible. And
again, Nick, we're on the same page with this. All I will say is that I just think that we can let the participants and the athletes and the association governing this particular sport or any sport work it out for themselves. I don't think we have to have a statute dealing with it. That I think would really, for me, is the bottom line.
Yeah, and that was my point with the whole economic and free market scenario. That way it solves itself without government intervention. All right, with that said, it's time for our top of the hour break. Go get something nice and cold to drink, whatever it is you like. Time for a bathroom break for this host at least. And we'll be back in about, I don't know, we'll give it 3 minutes. And we'll come back with even more hot topics for you to consider. We'll be right back.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
Welcome back.
Yep, there we are.
I'm Joe. He's Nick, and you are back with us, or we're back with you. I guess is probably the best way to put it. I was a little surprised. I just happened to glance at this and go, okay, it says here we go in our sort of off-screen messaging, and I'm going, what? We're back already? Anyway, yeah. So I'm Nick. No, he's Nick. I'm Joe. Hang on. He's Nick. He's Nick.
He
with a camouflage hat. Nick is wearing his camouflage. Nick is wearing his camouflage hat so that you can't really see him on your computer screen. If you're watching, if you're listening,
it won't matter.
It won't make any difference. Anyway, right. So thanks for being with us. You're listening to hour 2, or you're joining us with hour number 2 on the Nick and Joe show. Okay, that was kind of a long-winded re-intro.
Yeah, you did fine. I'm proud of you.
That's okay. I was, it's kind of the ad lib thing, right?
That's
I sort of jumped in. I wasn't sure whether you were going to do it or not, Nick. So I just sort of said, "Oh, I might as well."
Just about to, because I was bringing up the next topic.
Yeah,
and getting that ready in one of my tabs here, so I can read the appropriate part of it.
I saw Nick.
I realized that nobody was talking, so I said, "Okay, I better get back because I think I better bring this back in." And then you jumped in, so we did fine. We did all right. Okay. That's what you like about
we are entertainment professionals.
We are.
Yes.
We are. And we make pennies and pennies doing it too.
Well, let's not exaggerate things.
Now, the next topic, this just blows me away. First of all, and God bless them, the Conservatives are at least trying to do something on the federal level here. But here is this story comes from the CTV News. The Conservatives and the NDP are demanding Liberals take action on rising cost of living. That's the headline. Okay. Now, there's a long video, 15-minute video goes with that. I'm not going to play it because I didn't send it to John, and it's too long to play the whole thing. Anyway, you can watch it later for your own benefit. What I want to get to is what the NDP want to do, because the Conservatives are saying, you have a lot of influence over how expensive life is through taxation and regulation and all this other stuff. You can do something about it. And they simply aren't. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what the NDP would do. Okay, so starting about halfway down the page on this article from CTV, here's what the NDP have to say. We see clearly that corporations are making these massive profits. Profits. They are making record-setting profits, and who writes this stuff? Why would you use that word 3 times in the same sentence? They're making record-setting profits, and their record-setting profits are directly contributed to the cost of living going up. That's Yang Singh. He goes on to say, we believe very strongly the solution has to be the redistribution of wealth. The calls for action come the same day as Parliamentary Budget Officer released a new report showing the consumer price index now sits at its highest level since the introduction of targeted inflation targeting in 1991. Okay, first of all, let's talk about what Yang Singh had to say. Redistribution of wealth. He wants to tax the living daylights out of corporations. The vast majority, because he has no idea what he's talking about, the vast majority of corporations are little mom and pop stores. They're not Ford. They're not Hitachi. They're not Huawei. They're not these big multinationals. The vast majority of them are small companies.
Right.
Okay, so first of all, keep that in mind. So he has no idea what he's talking about. These huge profits he's talking about say nothing about the huge, and I put this in air quotes, profits the government's making on things like the carbon tax, okay, and the regulation fees and all that other stuff. Every time the government puts out a new form you got to fill out, there's probably a price tag at the bottom, and guess who pays it? We all do. So he's not acknowledging that at all. What he wants to do is dip into Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, which is exactly where this comes from. The redistribution of wealth was Marx's whole shtick. He wanted to take everything from everybody, collect it all up in one spot, and then give it all back, as if somehow that would prevent the old saying of being true of a fool and his money are very easily parted. That's a truism that's been as old as economics is. Because no matter what you do, some people just aren't good with money. Some people are very good with money. It's a talent, it's a skill, it's something you learn over time. Some people never learn the lesson. And I could sit here and tell you stories about some of the mistakes I've made and some mistakes people I know have made to demonstrate why I'm not a multimillionaire. It's very simple. I'm no good with money, and I know that. So I try to limit the damage and be as smart as I can with it. But his solution is to take everything from everybody and then pass it out. But you notice if push gets the shove, it's not his money he'd be taking, it's yours and mine. And that's the part that drives me up a wall. There's the elites that escape all this, his friends, whether it be Justin Drew, and what business has he got being included in this in the first place? He's the one making it possible by supporting the current government. He's given them a majority. He's a little puppy. He's a lapdog. And whatever Justin Trudeau wants, Yang Mead's going to give him. So he's not going to get involved in this. And that's what I mean about God bless them, the Conservatives are at least trying. And I'm sure that when Candice Bergen gave this press conference, she knew that. She knew that there's no way the NDP are going to go along with this, but they had to try, just in case maybe a few of them might have a conscience and want to bring this corrupt government to an end. Time will tell, but I am very much in doubt. So he's talking out of, not only is he a raving communist, but he's talking out of both sides. If he ever comes out and says, yeah, we'd kind of like to support that, but doesn't, then he's a hypocrite. So we'll have to see what happens. But had you seen anything on that?
I have. I saw the same news stories that you've seen, Nick, and I have to tell you, it's shocking to me how little these people know about the business world that they want to regulate. So here's the thing. The first thing is no corporation in this country pays no taxes. Okay, let's make that abundantly clear right from the word go. In order to incorporate, whether you're incorporating provincially or federally, you have to pay a fee to the government. In other words, you're paying a tax simply to incorporate yourself. Okay? That's for starters. The second thing is, when we talk about excess profits, and I don't even know what the standard is to determine what is or is not excess profit. But what I will say is about profits, excessive or not, those profits, okay, are actually coming to people who are shareholders, okay, mutual fund holders, etc. So if it's a publicly traded company and it's making a lot of profit, like banks, for instance, that money actually is paying for the pensions of people who are mutual fund holders whose mutual fund happens to own stocks in banks. So dividends, okay, are always paid from profit. So you have to
interrupt you there.
Yeah.
We have a phone call from Montreal.
Oh.
Hello, Robert.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine, sir.
Robert,
Yes, it's Robert. I haven't
our
called
friend
in a while
Robert from Montreal. How's it going, man?
I'm doing good. I only listen to podcasts. That's why I never call, because I like having your podcast in the car.
Oh,
the first thing right now, the thing you're talking about, the money, it's pure greed, Okay? Right now, the oil companies are making the best profit they ever did in history. So it's all greed. So you're not going to tell me it's because it pays shareholders. Okay?
But it does pay shareholders, Robert.
Yes, I know that, but it's greed. Right now, it's all it is, greed.
Okay, well,
the government's part.
Well, if making a contribution to my RRSPs constitutes greed, then sign me up. I'm greedy.
Not your fault.
Robert, you have
They
to
still
admit,
make enough money to pay your RRSP. Okay, the first thing I want to ask is, Nick, did you see the movie Top Gun?
of course. Oh, which the latest
Yes,
one?
yes or no?
The latest one?
Yes, you said you couldn't wait to see it.
It's coming. We're going to a place called Dryden this Saturday to see it.
Okay, I saw it. You're gonna love it.
I know. I've stopped watching trailers. I've cut myself off. I don't want to spoil it for myself. My wife and I are.
You're gonna love it. It's great. It's they did a good movie.
The first one.
Okay, second thing, your commercial. What is this climate change plan that's made for us? What climate change plan? We don't need a climate change
plan. That's the point of the commercial. We don't have one. We need one.
Why?
What do you mean?
Okay.
Why? Because
first of all, we're not polluting enough. Because if you know that the carbon monoxide, after a week in the atmosphere, turns into carbon dioxide.
Okay.
And the trees need that.
Okay. All right, Robert, let me interrupt. Okay. Let me
interrupt. Go ahead.
Okay. You have to go to the website. You're automatically assuming that when we talk about a climate plan or climate change plan, that we're talking about stopping climate change by eliminating whatever it is. What the ICSC does is it says climate change is natural, and that therefore, if we're going to have any kind of a plan to react to climate change, our plan should be to find ways to adapt to climate change. So look, if climate change, there's no point in us saying that climate change doesn't exist. I'm sitting here in Ottawa, and if climate change didn't exist, I'd be sitting under about 2 kilometers of ice, because this used to be a glacier. And the people out there, Robert, who are 20 and 25 and 30 and 35 and 40 years old or whatever. That. Okay, and I'm not counting you in that. I'm 60. When we went to school, we learned about the Canadian Shield, and the Canadian Shield was created by retreating glaciers. So climate change exists, and if you want to deal with climate change in any way, shape, or form, if you really believe, let's say, the windstorm that we had pass through Ottawa a couple of weeks ago, if you really
regular, it's normal. It's normal. We had those before.
I agree with you. But if you're going to say it's due to climate change, then the right response, I understand that. Okay. You're missing my point. If you're going to say it's due to climate change, okay, then don't try to stop climate change, because you're not going to stop it. Spend some money burying hydro cables, for instance.
That's an idea. Too expensive, though.
So that we actually have a stronger, more resilient infrastructure, and that's what the ICSC
you know how much that's going to cost, huh? You're talking billions here.
Well, do you know how much they're talking about spending in Ottawa in the next 27 years to stop
billions and billions and billions?
$60 billion is what the budget is for that.
And not a penny of
that. One other point. One other point. Right now, we're at 400 parts per million for CO2.
Okay.
In greenhouses, they pump it up to 850 to 1,000.
You're right.
That's what the plants want. And at 400 right now, it's not enough. The plants are on the starving side. You bring it below 250, all the plants die.
Right.
All the plants die. No animals, no humans. The Earth becomes Mars.
Okay. You're
So
right.
when they're saying we got to bring down the CO level, the CO2 level, they're nuts.
But just to be clear, the organization that is on that ad is not saying that. They're not saying that about CO2. On the contrary, the Patrick Moore just joined their board of directors.
I know. I totally in the same boat as Patrick Moore and
Right.
what's his name at ICFC?
Tom Harris.
He's always a guest reviewer. Tom Harris. And also I listen to John Robson. He's got the Climate Nexus. I read all his articles and listen to his YouTube things. And I'm in agreement with all three of them.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm not like climate change on this planet has been happening for 3 million years. The first 1.5 million years, I think the Earth was a big volcano cooling down. A billion years, sorry. So at least 3 billion years of climate change. And what's with 2 degrees? You know, like in Quebec here, the record is 40 degrees Celsius. We haven't beaten that, and it was done in 1921.
Sure. And
we haven't beaten the 40 degrees yet.
And if you look at the weather records, you'll find that the period of time where we had the most consistently speaking episodes of so-called extreme weather were in the 1930s, whether we're talking heat or cold and storms, etc.
Okay.
So listen, we're all in agreement with one another.
Yeah, I was just.
I saw a picture the other day of last year in Paris that the river was going up almost to the street. Then beside it, there was another picture of the same river at the same height in 1908.
Right.
So, okay, it happened before.
Yep.
Okay,
and we were not yelling climate change in 1908.
Robert, no one here is arguing with you. You're making points we totally agree with. In Killaloo in the 1920s, they had a flood that wiped out downtown. Okay.
Oh, where? Here?
Killaloo Ontario has a downtown.
There's a major flood in Killaloo, pretty much washed the town down Brennan's Creek. It was just.
What year was that?
What's that?
What year?
I think it was 1924. But my point is, the whole point about what ICSC is all about is about making the case that mankind is not responsible for, because climate always changes.
Exactly.
Okay, so they're making that point. And the point of the ad that you listen to is to drive you to their website to have a look and say, hey, that's right. These guys are worth contributing a little bit of money to because they need to continue to do this work. That's the whole point of the ad. Because
and did you know that carbon monoxide turns into CO2 after a week in the atmosphere?
Well, I didn't know that myself, but I'm not surprised to hear it.
Okay.
Well, I read it a lot of places.
Okay. Well.
All right, Richard.
Now I want to bring one last point.
Yeah.
I want to bring one last point.
Okay, got to make it quick.
Well, income taxes. Put a flat tax of 20%. If you're going to have one kid, you pay 15%. You got 2 kids, you pay 10%. You got 3 or more kids, you pay 5%. What is all this thing about shoving money to the federal government, then they shovel it back out? We could eliminate a lot of bureaucracy just by doing that. Keep the money in the pocket of people. Tell them what to do with it. And then they're going to buy popcorn and whatever something they said one time.
Beer.
You're allowed.
You're still allowed to say beer on the internet. We're not regulated yet.
You're even allowed to have one while you're on the internet.
And then we need a GST, a Canadian GST of 10%, and that's it. Every province 10%.
Well, you're never going to get rid of income tax, but Joseph, Robert, thank you for the call. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
No problem.
Robert, we're on your side.
You got it, buddy.
I hope so, because there's not too many people on my side in Quebec.
All right, my friend. Thanks for the call. Okay. I haven't heard from Robert in weeks.
Yeah, that's, well, there's your Robert dose.
Okay, so where were we before? Okay, gotta get back to this taxes and corporations. Okay, all right.
He did make a good
people are
point
gonna.
about flat taxes, although I don't know if I break it up like that.
I don't know. It's an interesting question. But look, here's the thing. Okay, about when you take a large corporation. Okay, let's take Amazon for instance. Okay, when Amazon locates in a city, they may get a local tax break just to build there or whatever for a period of time. But all of the people that they employ, okay, so there's the people that they employ, and then there's the extra taxes. We talked about this, I believe, last week or the week before. The actual extra that employers pay on payroll taxes above and beyond the portion that they've taken off that the employee pays, that the employer takes in trust and then remits to the government. So the employers pay a whole bunch of taxes above and beyond what they've deducted and remitted to the government. Plus they pay their property taxes. Plus they pay their whatever other fees are involved in licensing, etc. So the notion of a corporation that's not paying taxes is in fact wrong. In fact, probably the number one factor in preventing corporations from making profits is the amount of tax that they're paying. But above and beyond that, if they make a profit, that profit is, especially in the case of a publicly traded company, that profit goes into paying dividends, which are fund your RRSPs, or other, if you've invested straight with them. So the dividends, they're not just profits that are sitting in a bank account somewhere. They're actually being distributed. And quite often you take what you've earned, if you've invested in a company and the company's made a profit and you've gotten a dividend, you may take that money and invest it in another company. So the whole idea of these excess profits, and they don't even define what that means. It's bogus. And it's shocking, Nick, that anyone, how corporately, how economically, how commercially illiterate some of these political decision makers are. And it's not limited to the NDP. It's mostly in the NDP. A
widespread problem.
It's mostly in the Liberals, but you'll get people thinking this way, not understanding how businesses work and how corporations work. In the even amongst conservative members, elected conservatives.
You want to make an NDP or a Liberals eye spin right out of their sockets? Tell them corporations shouldn't pay any. And with that said, we'll take a break. We'll be right back with more on the Nick and Joe Show right after this.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
All right. Joseph is back. I don't know where he went, but he's back.
I'm kind of back.
Yeah, I see that. I see that. Um, the point, what was the point I was making? Oh, yeah, corporations should, I just finished up that thought. Corporations should never pay any kind of corporate tax. And the reason is corporations look at taxes just like a cost, it is to them a cost of doing business. And the way they recover the cost of doing business is to add it to the sticker price of whatever it is, product or service that they offer. So if you make widgets and the government says you have to pay 14% on as a corporate income tax, then you just add 14% to your widgets. So guess who actually pays the tax?
Right. No,
Exactly.
excellent point, Nick. I'm glad
It's
that you
only
brought that
one
up because I
taxpayer.
should have.
Yeah, well, no, it's okay. I mean, no one thinks of everything every time, but the point is, there's only one taxpayer, and people got to get that through their head. They think we got to tax the rich, we got to tax the this, we got to. No, we just need to lower taxes so more people hang on to their money and make better choices with it than the government does. What you're really saying is we got to get the state to control these people because we don't like what they're doing. Oh, couldn't have that. Well, anyway, so that's my little rant on that.
So what
Now,
I've done here is I've actually, so my desk could go up and down. It's one of these electronic or motorized desks, and I've just been sitting too long today. So I've raised the desk up, and I am now doing the show standing up.
so you've raised your standard, have you?
I've raised my standard of sitting.
Here you go. All right. Well, while you raise your standard of sitting, let me share this with you. This, I think, is a Shedwater moment. It's from True North, and
A shed water or a watershed?
watershed's different than a Shedwater.
Yeah,
Shedwater
it's a
can be
shed
called
water
wood.
moment. No, it's a watershed moment. Now you got me doing it.
I'm trying. Anyway, the point is, it's a landmark. It's a landmark case. BC man becomes one of the first Canadians to receive compensation for COVID-19 vaccine injury. Now, I have gone ahead and highlighted in blue so I can find it quickly and easily because I'm a professional. Uh, the pertinent, important part of this case, this story, and again, you can find this by going to True North. It's on their webpage. So if you're listening, uh, go and get the whole story. I always recommend read the whole story. But let me give you what I think is the heart of it. This is the judge talking to this is from a letter from, let's see, on May 20th, 2022, Whiteman, who is the plaintiff in this case, received a letter from Canada Vaccine Injury Support Program. That's who. Okay, so that's who's talking. Canada Vaccine Injury Support Program wrote the following. First and foremost, we would like to offer you our deepest sympathies for your ongoing health struggles. We wish you strength and support to sustain you during this difficult time and wish to thank you for submitting a claim with the VISP.
And
Follow,
and may the force be with you.
absolutely. We're due for the Star Wars movie, aren't we? Anyway, following an
Live
assessment,
long and prosper.
either that or prosper and live long. Following an assessment of your case, it has been determined by our medical review board that there is a probable cause of probable casual association between the injuries sustained at the vaccination, such as your claim, and as such, your claim has been approved for compensation. According to Whiteman, the guy who got the shot, the process to receive the compensation from the government was long, but received a letter linking his injuries and the vaccine was vindicating. Okay, so let me share with you what he suffered. He received the AstraZeneca vaccine in April 2021 and was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome shortly after. The condition left him partially paralyzed. You can see him standing in a walker in his home. Let's see, paralyzed. Whiteman alleges that his symptoms started with severe back pain just 10 days after his first and only shot and went to the emergency room with multiple times. He was admitted when he reported facial tingling. I had full facial paralysis. I could blink, but I couldn't smile or show my teeth at all, and a paralysis from the waist down as well. Whiteman told the National Post a few days after being admitted. GBS is an autoimmune condition in which the immune system attacks the peripheral nerves. This can lead to weakness, pain, numbness, or even partial paralysis. After spending more than 2 months in the hospital, he is now recovering at home. Doesn't say whether he'll fully recover or not, but I think this is a very important case because now they're admitting in court that there were injuries, serious injuries caused, and according to the article, there's at least 400 more. He got $284,000, by the way.
How much?
284,000.
Wow.
I'm sorry, the maximum sum a person can receive is 284. He did not disclose the specific amount, but he is eligible for income replacement up to 90 grand a year. Boom. There's in here somewhere it talks about how many. I think I read 400 other cases waiting to be heard in this particular vein. And I think this is if they get 2 or 3 more victories in this fight, then the Vax crowd is going to have a lot of answering to do. You're going to see a lot of people stepping up and say, you know what, I went through something pretty similar, and they'll have medical evidence to back it up. So the thing that bothers me is we've had this Pfizer dump of information, 80,000 pages, in which a whole host, I mean, hundreds of side effects. Now, granted, some side effects are very mild. Many of them don't apply to everybody by a long shot, but these are possible side effects, and there's several hundred of them. And I don't know how that compares to other vaccines, but people are going to be, this could break the back of this. And I might be over dramatic about it, but I think it's important that we talk about it. Yeah, exactly, Terry. They may have opened a can of worms that they are not going to be able to get the lid back on. This is the kind of thing that happens when you don't run long trials on vaccines to discover what the serious consequences are, because this, in this guy's case, is serious. It's life-changing. It's debilitating. This isn't just, I had a rash. This guy's partially paralyzed from the waist down, has to get around with a walker. So, how many cases like that have to come forward before somebody starts to say maybe this stuff wasn't nearly as safe as we were told it was?
Yeah, fair questions. I'm sitting down again, by the way.
I see that.
I had enough of my standing up. Okay. Where was I?
Well, we were talking
it's look, there were a lot of issues around these vaccinations. And I'm even, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm even reluctant to characterize them as vaccinations because they really aren't in the traditional sense of that term. Well, look, I'm not what has come to be known an anti-vaxxer. I had the AstraZeneca vaccination, both doses.
Yes, your eyelid's drooping.
Yeah, well, my eyelid has been drooping for a long time. As it happens.
Kidding.
No, but listen. As it happens, as you're describing this guy's symptoms, I'm thinking to myself, I have some of those. Unfortunately, I had some of those, the peripheral nerve damage, etc., before I had the vaccination. So
so you can't blame it on that.
Regrettably, I can't blame it on that. Nor will I even bother trying.
First of all, Craig makes a good point. How many cases have to come forward before the legacy media pays attention? I think it would probably be in the hundreds before they actually begin to say, okay, there's a story here we have to cover, if they ever say that. But
I don't think that you'll see the legacy media spending much time covering this, even with hundreds of cases.
Not on a one-off, no.
Because essentially, it comes to them admitting that they were wrong. in many respects,
And
and I
yeah,
don't think they really want to do that.
yeah, they would rather chew ground glass. But think about, you said you're not an anti-vaxxer. I'm not either. I mean, I've had the tetanus shot, and every once in a while you go for a booster. But that's every 4 or 5 years. This vaccine, you start needing boosters within months of getting the shot, and then the efficacy of them falls off dramatically to below 20%. And at the third time around, there's no difference at all. So, there's the vaxxed and the unvaxxed have the same level of protection. So, why are we continuing with this nonsense? I was in a health unit today, as an example, and everybody's still walking around insisting people wear masks, even though it's well known now that masks do not provide any level of protection, and it's nothing but making the people in the building feel better, psychologically feel better
Well,
because, they're keeping me safe. No, they're
psych-
not. Has nothing to do with
psychological
it.
psychological comfort is important too.
Yes, that's all, but that's all it is. There's no medical reason for it. So this is a medical facility. What about truth and honesty in treatment? Why would there's a piece of plexiglass between me and the guy I'm talking to, and we're both wearing masks. This goes right back to the heart of the whole problem. Anyway, it's one of the last bastions of it. Everywhere else, most people have long since given up wearing it. There's a few who still do, and I don't care. If they want to walk down the street with a mask on or walk into a store with a mask, I don't care. It's because they're not making me do it. So it's waning, but it's taking a long time, especially in government-run institutions.
Yes.
So that's the this whole thing. But I really wish, and I know it's not going to happen anytime soon, but I really wish that an independent journalist with some integrity would dig into this Pfizer dump and start pulling out some of the stuff that's in it that matters to
Well,
let people know.
honestly, what we really need to have is an independent inquiry into the response that we had to COVID, and to have the terms of reference of the inquiry such that it could possibly look into some of the data that, as you say, that's coming from organizations, companies like Pfizer. But there's more. It goes far beyond that, and to the question of, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the vaccinations, such as they are effective, and that encouraging the population to get vaccinated was not a bad thing to do. That's a far cry from justifying shutting our economy down for weeks at a time. And one of the problems that I think that occurred is that very early on in this crisis, if you will, the governments did two things. The first thing is they threw out carefully thought out emergency response plans that were comprehensive. That is to say, that they weren't just focused on medical issues and health care, and they went to the doctors and they said to the doctors, "How do we handle this?" And of course, doctors who know nothing about public transit, they know nothing about supply chain, they know nothing about agriculture. They just know that when you have an outbreak of a virus in a hospital, you isolate that virus either by quarantining the ward or quarantining the floor or quarantining the entire hospital. And so that was the first mistake that the government made. The second mistake that our governments made, and not just talking about here in Ontario, but the second big mistake I think the governments made was that they surrendered their decision-making power. In fact, I would even go so far as their decision-making duty, their duty to make decisions on behalf of the public and to be accountable for those decisions. They surrendered their decision-making to unaccountable bureaucrats. And so, how often did we hear elected officials coming and saying, well, we have to shut the economy down, or we have to have a mask mandate because that's what the medical officer of health is telling us we have to do? Well, no, your health officials have a responsibility to provide you with information, but ultimately the decision has to be yours. And there is no, how often do we hear people say, follow the science? Well, the truth is, the science has nothing to do with what is the right decision or the wrong decision. The science may tell you what the consequences of a particular decision might be, but ultimately, to decide to go one direction or another direction, or maybe to find some sort of a middle ground, isn't a scientific decision. Okay, science doesn't tell us what our decision has to be. Science only tells us what the decision should be if you want to avoid a particular consequence. And so this idea that we have to do it because the science tells us we have to do it, no, the science only tells us we have to do it under certain conditions that we ourselves are imposing in the debate. So it's maybe it's a bit of a sophisticated argument against what governments did. I'm not trying to make it too complicated or too cloudy, but the bottom line is this: okay, we elect our officials to make decisions, and we expect them to make decisions based on the best information that they have. And when we say the best information, we don't just mean the best medical information. We also mean the best economic information, the best environmental, the best, I don't know, the best technological, whatever. Okay, there's lots of things that go into a decision, not just what the doctors say is the science behind their recommendation. They may have science behind their recommendation, but their science has nothing to say about the condition of roads.
Well, here's the analogy I used last week, the week before about this was the idea that letting the doctors dictate to us what we're going to do about this is the same thing as letting your insurance agent drive your car. No, most people would say, no, that's not a good idea, because he'll see every threat out there and, put your car on the shoulder of the road and say, you're not driving, it's not safe. Nobody can live, that's just nonsense.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, actually, because it encapsulates exactly what the problem was.
Yeah, precisely.
Is of course your insurance, if you ask your insurance company, insurance adjusters, what the best situation is, okay, the most prudent thing to avoid claims on your vehicle, they'll say, well, leave it in the driveway, don't drive it.
That's right.
And they would be right. In fact, they would be scientifically right. That is what the science would say, okay, about that particular problem. But that's not the only issue. If the only issue that we had to deal with was how to avoid insurance claims on our vehicles, then okay, fine. But that's not the only issue. Just like even if you accept all of the arguments that were made around COVID from a medical, strictly speaking, a medical perspective, even if you accept all of those decisions, it's not the only issue that our elected officials have to deal with. They have to deal with the education of our kids. They have to deal with the, as I say, supply chain, agriculture. All of these
something
things
here that I want to point out. Number one, the idea that the government looks to experts to make the decisions for them. Take the field of education. Okay, they let experts in education dictate what curriculum is going to be, and then say, well, that's what the experts tell us. And then they go over to health, and they do the same thing. And they do the same thing in every aspect of, in every government portfolio. They're always talking to experts.
Right.
Nothing wrong with talking to experts, but experts are not accountable to the public. You are. Now, I want to make a point here to Chrissy. She was talking about how, she doesn't like the controversy, and whenever she's asked to put a mask on, she does. And she's talking about OC Transpo. Well, Chrissy, here's a piece of advice. The next time you get on a bus and the bus driver says, please put a mask on, smile very nicely, say no thank you, and walk to your seat. And if anybody gives you a hard time, say, I don't have to, and I won't. And that way, if they get upset, that's not your fault. You're simply stating the fact. You don't have to. The mandate for that is over. So it's called standing up for yourself.
Yeah.
That's my
I
word
don't
of
know that
advice.
Nick, I don't know that the mandate on public transportation is over yet.
Well, it only
Provincially.
matters if people actually follow it.
Well, that's a different question altogether.
Okay,
But
so
I do think that to the degree that there still is any kind of a mandate on public transportation, I believe that at least provincially speaking, that will be lifted very soon, imminently. I think I read somewhere.
well, she's getting mixed messages about OC Transpo. So just decide for yourself what the message is going to be that you're going to give the driver if they tell you to put a mask on. Say, thanks, but I'll decline your invitation to put a diaper on my face. And you don't need to be that nasty about it, but just say no, thank you. I choose otherwise, and go and sit down. That's all. You don't need to be confrontational. You don't need to get into a big fight. Just say no, thank you, and walk to your seat and sit down. And that's all there is to it. Now they may, hey, put a mask on. So no, we've just had this discussion, and the answer that you have my answer. And unless you want me to get off the bus, I'm going to stay here till I get to my stop. And if they want you off the bus, then just wait for the next one. You'll probably get a different answer. All right. Anyway, if you have the time to do that. The last topic I want to get to real fast because we're running out of time. This is enough to drive me out of my mind. The headline is All White School Board censures only black member because he wasn't woke enough. Now, I don't know if there's racism in this or not. Why they point out the fact the guy's black, because frankly, I couldn't care less. But the Waterloo Public School Board has a trustee by the name of Mike Ramsey, who is a former cop and he's been a member of the trustee since 1989. So he's been around the block more than once. Anyway, let me just dive into the article here. Ramsey, an immigrant and former police officer who has served as a trustee since 1989, says the move to silence him was an attempt to silence his views. The Waterloo Regional District School Board voted 6-3 in favor of sanctions against him, which include being banned from attending board meetings on June 27th, as well as all committee meetings or receiving materials until September 30th. The decision will not result in Ramsey's losing his position. Well, you might as well have, because now he can't do his job. The original complaint was filed in February, likely by Laurie Tremblay. Since then, no detail has been made public. The fact that my colleagues are hiding behind a veil of secrecy allows them to put their own spin on what the issues were. And why? Again, this comes back to this whole woke mentality. He says something you don't like, so you're going to shut him up by censuring him and taking away his ability to serve the public in the way that he was sworn to do. I don't know if public school board trustees take an oath or not, but there certainly is a certain fiduciary duty he has. And to censure him, my problem is, who cares what color he is? That should have been taken right out of the article if possible, because it plays no bearing on the article. And I think it's a little bit of sensationalism on the news agency who brought the story forward. But set that aside. The fact is, Mr. Ramsey has been there since 1989. So there's a lot of probably internal politics going on here. And they decided the best way to deal with him, rather than put up with his insistence and sticking to the truth and demanding accountability, which is probably what I'm surmising, but probably what he got in trouble for, was to censure him and say, that you know what, we're done listening to you. We don't want to hear from you anymore. And we're going to take away your ability to function, even if we can't throw you off the board. And that's outrageous.
Yeah, well, that's a problem too. Is that the power of elected officials to sanction other elected officials is not new, but its use today more and more. It's becoming more and more used, and it's kind of like everything old is new again. The only good thing is that we don't have any more Parliament, for instance, voting to convict its own members of treason and then beheading them, which was not an unusual. It was not an entirely unheard of practice for a period of time in Britain. So thankfully we haven't done that here. But more and more we're doing the equivalent of it, where we're
we
going,
don't do it
okay,
physically, now we do it psychologically.
Well, we have ethics guidelines, and then we basically say, if you don't follow these ethical guidelines, which in many cases are just so vague that it's hard to even know when you're violating them or not. But even when you haven't violated them, all you have to have is, these days in many cases, all you have to be is accused, and the persecution it's off to the races, so to speak. And before you know it, you find yourself being bullied by a group of elected officials who are using what probably is a reasonable desire to have, ethical standards and standards of behavior amongst elected officials, amongst our colleagues, but they end up being judge, jury, and executioner. And I think that's a problem. There's no due process then.
We have had for centuries a code of conduct. It was simple, short, sweet, and to the point. And everybody knew what they were. And they governed life, whether you believed in the author or not. And those were called the 10 Commandments. You put them up in every school, you put them up in the House of Commons, and as long as you follow those, you won't get in trouble. Because let's face it, don't steal, don't sleep with another man's wife, don't take his, do not take, slander your neighbor. All these things are covered under those 10 sentences. And that's the only code of conduct, code of ethics we need. And the reason they come up with new ones is for that very nebulousness that you're talking about the idea that, well, if we write a code of conduct so vague and hard to distinguish, we can get anybody for anything.
Well, I remember very quickly during the Enron scandal south of the border, there was a lot of talk about the need to introduce ethical classes on business ethics in business schools and university. And I assume that a lot of those courses have in fact been implemented. But one wonders why you need to have a class in business ethics. It's again, treating the symptom. The fact is we're raising kids and they become adults and they don't have a sense of self-discipline. So we have to invent rules and enforcement mechanisms to impose what ought to be self-imposed in terms of behavioral standards.
All right. With that, we have to stop it there, Joseph. We're tight up against the clock. As a matter of fact, we're a little bit over. So I want to thank all the participants in the chat room and anybody listening online. We're glad you were with us this evening. And for Joseph and I, we wish you a very great week. We'll see you all again next week. In the meantime, we'll be Caritas et Amor. They are CBS. Good evening. God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace. And may you have a fair wind and a following sea.